Hello, everyone from IE Business School headquarters here in Madrid. It is a pleasure to have this opportunity to welcome all of you, alumni, current students, faculty, and staff to this edition of our newsletter video. Today, I have the pleasure to be joined by Bogdan Roščić, who is currently the director of the Vienna State Opera. So something quite interesting for us to have today in terms of topics and themes from a business standpoint. Bogdan is Austrian. He was born in Belgrade and grew up in Vienna, and he is currently in Vienna. Before being the director of the Vienna State Opera, he led as president of Sony Masterworks, a classical music unit of Sony based in New York City. Before that, he had a managing director role at Decca Music in London. Before that, the famous Deutsche Grammophon in Hamburg. So a long history of careers and work in the music industry, but now really very much in the public sector in the sense in social services, cultural and arts services. So welcome, Bogdan. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I think it'd be interesting if you could share with us, you've moved from businesses like Sony, for example, or Decca into where you are now. What was that transition like, and how do you think about the trade-off between the bottom line of business where you are and the other, let's say, KPIs that you might have from an arts and social services standpoint?
Sure. I mean, the easy answer, I guess, would be to say what I do now, money is a means. In what I did before, money ultimately was the goal. Some of my colleagues at the labels I worked for would not be well pleased with my answer because they don't perceive themselves that way. But ultimately, there is a difference. However, it would be simplistic to give you that answer. I mean, even this house, it used to be a real estate theater. Now it's held by a holding company and it's an LLC. And there are very real economic expectations. The state, Republic of Austria, which is our owner, wants us to run it like a business. And this house is I wouldn't say famous. I hope it's famous for other things, but it's known in the opera biz for the fact that it earns almost half of its budget itself. Whereas other houses have that quota is under 20%, sometimes as low as 15 and lower. So it's very successful as in terms of ticket sales and in attracting other kinds of income. So there are, both sides to what positions like this are represented even here, maybe with a different emphasis than at a record label. But if it's only about the art, you fall short. If it's only about the business, it's meaningless. I mean, this house is made possible by all the taxpayers of Austria. And it's meant for the common good. There's a law regulating how it needs to be run. I guess what I'm saying is there are more similarities than one would initially think.
And so there's a certain hint in a way of kind of purpose in what you said, and that's a topic that's on the mind of a lot of our current students. I know some of our younger generations of alumni, the idea of business with a purpose. Could you share with us a little bit about how did you make the mental transition from places like Sony, clearly a for-profit business, to where you are now? I mean, was there a purpose element to it?
For me, it was very easy because my state of mind was always the same. I went into the record biz not to be a businessman, and I would strongly discourage any of your students, to go into something like the record biz because of the biz part of it. I went in there to make recordings and it's a lofty goal, and you don't always succeed, but ultimately to document what I consider the world's most important music in ways that will be around for decades, hundreds of years, if you will. That's the only thing that interested me. The rest, I just kind of I adapted to. I have no formal business training. I hadn't read a PNL. Well, that's now. But you know, I studied musicology and philosophy. I worked as a journalist because I didn't know what to do with my education, and then somehow found my way into radio, a bit of TV, and then went into the record business. So my mindset hasn't changed, which is I think I adapted very, very easily. I'm ultimately only interested in either what comes out of the speakers, what came out of the speakers, or what I see on stage. The rest has to function to make all of that possible.
That to me raises an interesting question in the sense of, so on the one hand, you have to meet business needs. I mean, you said about half of the revenues are generated by your audience. And so, but you're in a particular genre. Let's say you're related to classical music prior to Vienna Opera, but now in opera and let's say more traditional forms of music, if we could use that term. Younger audiences, I would imagine there's some challenges to how do you maintain and attract younger audiences in this particular genre, because you have to do that. That's part of the business. But then you also mentioned the side of you that you've always been in this business because of the art part of it. So how do you balance those two factors?
Well, there are limits to how far one could go. You know, in another, if this were a different kind of organization, if its mission were different, one could say, if you have problems attracting a younger audience, and I'll come to that in a moment, then just change the product. That is not possible here. This house, like I said, there's a law regulating what I can and cannot do, how I have to run the house. My artistic decisions are completely autonomous. Not even the head of the government can interfere with that. That's protected by law, very wisely, I think. So what's expected is an uncompromising pursuit of world-class quality within that field. And we have certain advantages in doing that, you know, not to be arrogant, but for example, the house orchestra here in its spare time is one of the world's, if not the best known orchestra in the world, the Vienna Philharmonic. This house, because of its importance, of its historic importance, attracts, not because, you know, Austria is such an important market, and for example, for recordings that those artists may or may not be making, attracts all the biggest names in the business, singers, conductors, directors. So that's what's expected of me. And I cannot target a special demo. This house has to be there for everybody. And my job is to make it interesting, relevant, and accessible to everybody, which is not so easy because we can't give away the tickets. Coming back to what we just said, we have to, you know, there's a business aspect to what I do here. So one of my priorities, and I think this maybe was neglected a bit at this house previously, is to rejuvenate the audience. I don't think you can take that for granted. And in my experience, the product, which, like I said, I cannot change, and I do not look at as a product, but it is relevant to everybody if they get to experience it. So for me, you know, to make a very long answer, maybe somewhat shorter, you start attracting younger audiences by starting to speak to them. Not at them, but with them, to starting a dialogue, contextualizing what we have on offer, communicating, using social media in a relevant manner, and so on and so forth, but not by fiddling with the output.
So in some sense, you're using marketing and communications to change framing, to change messaging, sometimes to attract different groups of people. The core product stays the same. Can you innovate with let's say ancillary products in the sense of I know here, for example, in Madrid at the Teatro Real, they have programs for young kids where they introduce them to opera and to dance, and of course parents are going with those young kids as well. I mean, are you thinking about any kinds of innovations in try, kind of try before you buy type experiences for people?
Oh, no. We have dozens of such initiatives that my tenure started last year. It was, of course, severely affected by the epidemic or pandemic, and it has remained like that to this day. But I don't think there's any one particular magic trick, but I'll give you a few examples. So we've opened up dress rehearsals to audience members 27 or younger for the symbolic fee of 10 euros. So what a dress rehearsal is in an opera house is basically the last rehearsal before opening night. And it's not treated as a rehearsal. I think I've gone to dress rehearsals. The last time I had an interruption in a dress rehearsal was more than 10 years ago. So you see the finished thing that some very impressive artists and an incredible array of talent has been working on for in some instances, months, and then the final 6 weeks of rehearsals in the house. That is a privilege. And we've opened that up. It's a bit provocative because, I'm getting emails from people saying, well, I'm 29 or I'm 69. Why can't I come in? But it was a deliberate decision. So that was one thing. Another thing was to open up a second venue, which we are building as we speak. I had to raise the funds myself, which I'm happy to report I was able to. The state contributed something. It's very close to this house, a wonderful location, which will be dedicated, a small theater, under 300 seats, but the perfect venue for all kinds of events that you cannot have in a house like this. Our hall seats 1,700 people, and then there's almost 600 standees. So it's a big theater, and it has to be full. Coming back to what we said a moment ago, because it has to generate a certain revenue. So this second venue will take the pressure off and allow me to do all kinds of, put on all kinds of performances and other events that will rejuvenate not just the artistic side of things, young artists program, on the opera side as well as on the ballet side and other things, but also the audience. So we are. It's a big focus because, first of all, I think it has to be because of our mission, which is not to exclude anybody and not to be just happy that between tourists and experienced opera goers, this house is full anyway, night after night, but also in terms of just thinking ahead, thinking about a future and somehow thinking about how to help a new generation of opera lovers come to the art form and to this house.
You mentioned in what you just shared venues, and it made me think of digitalization. I mean, you've been a record company, a music company exec for a while, and obviously seen the digitalization of the entire industry. How do you think about that now, from where you're sitting now, in the sense that there is a trend now more towards live experiences, sort of in some sense an anti-digital movement. Let's have real, human experiences. But then there are lots of things going on, even in opera and ballet, with digitalization and new channels for delivery. How do you think about that from where you are?
I've had ample opportunity to think about that during all these lockdowns. Last season, out of 10, our season is September to end of June, so 10 months. We were closed for almost 7. And so, but we were able to continue working, and all the new productions that I planned, also programmed in later seasons, I had to basically continue working and play one performance, so that we basically are able, that we understand the production, that we own it and can then put it on later. And what we did, of course, was film those performances. This being Austria, there's a very strong public broadcaster who was has a culture and history and a news channel called ORF 3, and they put on these performances in prime time, no less. And we attracted, over the course of these almost 7 months, we attracted 6 million people in a country which has 9 million inhabitants. So first of all, many journalists, I had interviews about this. I said, well, you must be happy. Look at those numbers. So is this the future of opera? And I said, no, it isn't. And I said so emphatically because during all these TV-only performances, I sat in my box, we call them the ghost performances. In an empty hall, there's something very, very powerful, but not in a good way. Watching this world famous, incredible orchestra and the stage, and watching the spectacle unfold. And time after time, I thought the same thing to myself. It is the most miserable situation not to be able to share this, even with 2,000 people I don't even know, with an anonymous crowd. But that energy, the experience of a shared experience, is irreplaceable. And so I think our future very much remains people buying a ticket and coming for an experience that cannot be repeated exactly the same way. However, I do think that digitization presents countless opportunities to give context, to give access. I'll give you one more example. Before a new production, we did in this theater. There's a tradition of doing a so-called matinee, where the director welcomes, the director of the show, the conductor, some of the singers, and they talk about the production and the piece. We did this now for the camera too, and put it online. And lo and behold, instead of 1,000 people seeing that, 50,000 people see it. So it's another way of using the digital opportunities, but without deluding ourselves that we can actually replace the analog experience, because I don't think that's ever going to happen. I hope that's never going to happen.
So the human factor, the magic, I think you made clear that that's an interesting point. So speaking of kind of human magic, I mean, you've worked in quite different cultures. I mean, you've been in New York City, you've been in London, you're now in Vienna again. And we have students and alumni from all over the world that know very well from their studies at IE that it's not always easy to work in multicultural teams. So I wanted to ask you, from your experiences, I mean, how have you found the differences in culture in those three places, for example? Big differences, small differences, and how do you as a senior executive adapt in terms of your style?
I wouldn't want to give you a boring answer, but I found them largely negligible, to be perfectly honest. There are very real differences. There are trivial differences in everyday life. You even after all these years working in the US, I need a millisecond to respond to the ubiquitous question, "How are you?" Which here is just nobody asks anybody else. So it's a bad example probably, but you know what I mean. But when you come to the core of I don't know, making decisions, motivating people, somehow keeping a creative process going, I found all these places which are in themselves very cosmopolitan and very international. If you look at a big multinational record business like Sony Music, that's just how it is. I found the differences very, very small. And also in mentality, the Viennese like to think of themselves as the world champions of intrigue and machinations, and I'm not sure how to translate the word intrigue. Actually, and they think that the floor is very, very slippery, especially slippery here. And I must say, I cannot, after all the time abroad, I just cannot confirm that. In the really interesting aspects, I found all those places and societies to be surprisingly alike.
So would it be fair to say that you sort of manage and lead in a sense, looking for the common denominator more than paying much attention to the small differences that you based on what you said, you haven't seen as particularly important?
I think that's exactly what I did, maybe out of an instinct, and also maybe out of the necessity to somehow remain authentic. I mean, you can't take a job like this. I was responsible with Sony. I was responsible for a label, Sony Masterworks, which is based in New York. I was responsible for the rest of the world business and a label called Sony Classical, not to bore you with these details, based in which I then transferred from London to Berlin for various reasons. And, how do you, and between them are some very uncomfortable flights. So how do you transform yourself into a different person the other end? I mean, you have to somehow, it has to stay authentic, it has to stay normal. And so I guess it's exactly what you said. Instead of emphasizing those little differences, it's just looking for similarities and looking for what's identical and what works everywhere. And maybe because of the way our world is developing and evolving, maybe that's easier now than it was 30, 40 years ago. I guess it is.
Yeah, I think authenticity, I think, is a very important word, and we hear it a lot, and I think we're seeing in younger generations of business students and business graduates a real doubt over the authenticity of leadership, political leadership, business leadership. And so I think authenticity is a key word and important for leadership and management, just to highlight that. As a kind of a closing question that I wanted to ask you, so we have our students and our alumni who are going to be joining in with us here to see this broadcast. Any messages based on your experience, either as a business person or just as a person? Any key messages you'd like to share with our business school community?
This is something I've been thinking about a lot. One of my sons is studying at IE, and I'll illustrate maybe. The other day I saw a clip from a film about Gianni Agnelli. Now, I don't know whether your students know who that was, but of course in the 1960s and 70s, he was not only one of the world's richest men, but also one of the world's most glamorous men, and the big Casanova, and a fashion leader in his day. And there was this former supermodel who had dated him among many other women, explaining what made him so fascinating. And she said, Gianni Agnelli, today all the men are boring as hell because they're also involved with making money. And he was different. He knew something about other things as well. So if that doesn't motivate the student, albeit maybe more a male student, I don't know what will. But going away from this or that part of life, overall, I think the biggest danger I see in a wonderful business education is that is all that you take out of your education. And then you become, an expert in I don't know, working the system, gaming the system, making contributions beyond that. I mean, I'm sounding too negative now, probably, but it simply is not enough. You have to know something about life beyond how its economic foundations function.
And I mean, just to follow up, so if the kind of the platform or the focus shrinks, towards what you said, towards, let's say, a financial aspect of business. I mean, any ideas of how do you keep that open? I mean, you seem to have kept it open in the types of jobs you chose. I mean, what kinds of things, especially for young business students, I mean, what kind of things should they go after to keep that focus wide open?
It's a great question, Lee. I think you keep it open by understanding and reminding yourself that there is a kind of knowledge beyond what we are taught increasingly now to see as the only kind of knowledge, which is, quantifiable, the harder stuff. I claim that the arts, literature, music, everything, all the genres are a depository of our accumulated knowledge of humankind, and that they know that this knowledge is every bit as real as what somebody learns in a course of, I don't know, analyzing companies for M&A purposes. Just expressed differently. It's more ambiguous. It's maybe harder to put your finger on, but nonetheless, it gives you a vocabulary to talk and think about life, which will prevent you from becoming very, very one-dimensional.
Would you go so far as to say that the arts and humanities ought to be a little bit of a DNA that every business person should have?
I'll yes, and I'll go further than that. I mean, look at me. I've if I say so myself, in my business, I've reached some very interesting positions. And I don't think it was because I had a great business education. In fact, like I said earlier, I had none. Having that side of your personality will make you a more successful executive. I don't think that's the reason to do it. I think that's, again, you can't make everything into a tool, or else, pardon the pun, you will become a tool. I'm sorry, but you will be surprised how differently people react to somebody who's able to discuss more than real estate pricing differences in any given city.
So maybe the magic formula is a healthy dose of business acumen if you're going into business, combined with intellectual inquiry and a healthy dose of arts and humanities.
I think that's absolutely what is called for, and I think any engagement with the arts and the humanities carries such a high reward. I don't think you need to do it. You should do it because, again, it promises you some kind of advantage, although it will give you an edge, like I said, but it carries its own reward. And I think the life is immeasurably poorer without that element of who we are.
Well, Bogdan, thank you very much for spending the time with us. You shared with me before our discussion today that you were just informed that you're going to be reopening on Sunday after a period of closure. Yep. So you've got a lot to do. Adaptability and flexibility is obviously are important skills in business. So we'll let you go, but thank you very much for joining us on behalf of the entire IE Business School community. Thank you.
Thank you. It was great meeting you and talking. Thanks.